But I marveled that here I am in spirit, you know, and yet I'm feeling this in such a tangible, solid way. And yet every time I had a question, it's like the answer would come. I thought, how can this be? And the answer I got was that all spirit is matter. All energy is tangible. It just is at different vibrations or different levels. And here I was experiencing it at a very, very high level. That's why it felt so real. But as I held him, literally just weeping, that here I am with my son. I get to say goodbye. He's fine. I felt someone come up behind me. And as they came up behind me, I was overwhelmed. I mean, what I felt was so much power, so much knowledge, so much wisdom, so much cosmic all-knowingness, and yet it was also so personal. Absolutely personal, absolutely loving. And as I stood there holding my little boy, I felt those divine arms wrap around and hold me. Now, as there was this embrace of me holding my son and deity holding me, that's when the download came. I mean, that's when it's like, it almost felt as if everything went away and then I became part of everything. I was part of that. I was part of everything out there. My son had melded into me. I had melded into what I call God, and we literally became one. And then just all this knowledge, truth, comprehension, everything came flowing through me in a way where it was very, very intimate. It was very, very personal. I didn't see the future. I didn't see, you know, the creation of the world. What I experienced was my life and what had happened in my life. And I saw all the things in my life that were beautiful, all the things that were painful, all the things that I judged as mistakes. You know, I saw things that I judged as wrong, and yet in this beautiful embrace, there was no judgment. I saw that it was all unconditional love. It was as if not just, you know, the being that held me, but the entire universe was saying, look how much we've loved you. Look how much we've supported you. Look how we've honored your life. Look how we've allowed you to go and learn and choose and grow and be. And it was absolutely unconditional love. So everything I saw was very, very loving. It was perfect. I realized that my life was perfect, even with the pain, even with the accident, everything that had happened. And the huge shift is I realized in that moment that I had actually created it. And that was interesting for me, because in my belief system, I believed, and I use that word consciously, it was a belief that God was doing this to me. You know, that God had taken my family, that God was throwing things in my path to see how I might react, to prove me, you know, worthy or of worth in some way, or to see what I would do. And yet in this loving, loving space, I realized I had nothing to prove, that I was absolutely loved unconditionally. The only one that didn't know myself was me, you know. God knew me perfectly. I just didn't know myself, and so that I had literally taken part in creating this experience, this life that would teach me everything I got to know to go back home, having experienced it. Now, here I was holding my son, who I loved. I mean, a father's love is unconditional, right? And he was just toddling at the time of the accident. In fact, we'd just had Easter Sunday, and he was toddling around picking up the eggs, calling them balls, you know, and he would bring them to me and say, ball, ball, and he was so perfect to me. And yet I realized as I held him, as this toddler who toddles around and falls down and bumps his head and the snot's rolling down and all that goes with it, that the same love I felt for him was simply magnified to what I call God, and God held me in that same light. In fact, I was here slobbering and snotting and falling down, but he was saying, look at my son, he's walking. Look at my children, they're learning to walk. They're taking their steps in this life, this thing we call life, simply growing and progressing and learning and remembering who they really are, which is part of me, which is divine. And that was the most powerful part, is I realized, and it's been very difficult for me to say this, but in those arms I realized, number one, that I was perfect. I mean, that my life was perfect, that in his eyes I was absolutely perfect. And that I was also divine, that I was part of that we were truly connected, and that I was divine, and that the divinity within me I had forgotten, but it was still very evident. And therefore, if I was divine, then we all are. We're all divine. We're all perfect, and we're here placing all kinds of judgments on ourselves, yet the universe just champions the process of our learning.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot I don't know. Again, I'm not a guru, but something weird happened to me, that's all. And I guess the last part was this being who absorbed me, and I had this download, said, now I want to introduce you to my creator, our creator. God, face to face. Face to face. God didn't have a face, by the way. Remember, there's no stuff there. But he wasn't the guy with the big white beard and the lightning bolts, let me put it that way. And I'll tell you what God looked like, kind of. I've never been able to paint this. I've been trying and trying and trying, and I just can't get it yet. Not yet, anyway. So pretend you are the Hubble Space Telescope. And so this is surrounding you on all levels, okay? Everywhere. And you know, when you look at a photograph of a galaxy is made up of little points of light, stars, right? Little points of light, jillions of them, right? And in this case, it was infinite. It went on forever. Little points of light. And I was one of those points of light. And we were all connected. And each one of those points of light was every tsetse fly, every snail, every human being, every rock who had ever lived. And that's right, rocks are alive. I can't explain that, but rocks are also made out of love. Everything is made out of love. So it was like every being who had ever lived was there. And we were all connected. We were all one thing. And now we were separate. I was still Raymond, me, but I was also we collectively together were God. And I had this feeling of, I have all the potential and power of God. I wasn't God, but somehow through the connection with all the other points of light, I was God. So I wasn't God, but I was God. And it was like this one big thought, one big floating sphere of awareness. And we were singing, and I'll never forget this. This was so beautiful. It was worship. That's the best word I can describe it. And it was about love. And it makes music as we understand it, it seemed like a cheap imitation. I could taste it and touch it and swallow it and digest it. And it took on whole other dimensions. And we were singing, I love you. We love you. It was all, we were worshiping one another with pure, infinite love. And it was the most beautiful thing.
And so what happened is, after a while, I ran out of questions, because I got it. I got the whole picture, the perfect knowledge that is present in the mind of God or everywhere, and I understood it. And I no longer had a body, but using another metaphor, it was like I was like a child being cradled by a loving parent, and the being of light and I took off at the speed of thought, which is not limited by light speed and all of that, because what happened is we went around the universe what appeared to be a universe like this one, except that there was no darkness in it. So we went from star to star, and it was from radiance to radiance, and there were no spaces in between, maybe because of the means of propulsion, the perfect. And it was like when someone wants to show you their family and they take out the pictures of their children and their grandchildren. Well, these were the galaxies and the supernovas and the comets and all of these magnificent celestial objects. And the other thing I forgot to say is that the feeling that I had was that I was home. This is where I came from, and that part of this remembering that I had in my NDE was that I had come back to where I came from. So we went on this tour, and everything was just radiant and alive. There's no dead matter. Every star, every light that we see in the sky, it is a being, is alive. And then we went to this sun that seemed to be, at first, it seemed to be in the center of all things, this whole spiritual universe. And it also seemed to have been newly formed, like it was just formed in that moment. And we went into another portal that was like at the center of the sun, and we went back into this cosmic void, like before the Big Bang, or whatever you believe. We went into this cosmic void, and I was so in love with the being of light that I and everyone else just melted back into this primal oneness. And it was just perfect. It was like the essence or the quintessence of everything that ever will exist before in the next cycle of creation was there. And I believe that we were all there, and we were all one. And I found myself coming out of this unity as a drop in this cosmic ocean and saying, oh, I remembered that I had been Beverly, but here I was, one with God and one with all things. And it was like a drop of water in the ocean. I was separate, and yet I was part of that ocean, the cosmic ocean of God and of all creation. There before me, angled upwards and to the right, was this funnel-shaped object, which people today call the tunnel, but to me it looked like a funnel that was angled upwards and to the right, and it was larger at the entrance, and there was this tiny pinpoint of light at the far end. And we flew into this funnel, and it was like a portal to another dimension. And we might have flown the entire length of the physical universe, but I had no way to gauge that, because there was no space and no time in this dimension. Once we entered that area, that portal, we were outside of the space-time continuum. And it's really hard to find words for this, but so I'm going to use some metaphors. But at some point, the angel was gone, and I arrived at the other end, and there before me was the living presence of the being of light. And this being was all-knowing. It knew everything that was going to happen and will happen, and the reasons behind them. And it was there was a perfect justice, and it also contained all things that ever were or will be. And it was loving me. It was just pouring out this unconditional love at me. And I thought, well, this isn't the guy on the top of the Sistine Chapel. I had this, image of what God would be like, but I figured this has to be God because this is beyond words and perfect in every possible sense.
And as I'm expanding out, I'm wondering what's going on, then I start feeling this presence. And it was God. And he let me know that he's now surrounding me, protecting me, and I'm expanding out. And now what words I tell you were words, he didn't speak to me. He made his thought known to me. Like I tell my friends, I'll say red. And all of a sudden, you'll see the color red in your head. Or I'll say apple and you visualize an apple. So his thoughts were made known to me. And as I'm expanding out, he said to me in my interpretation, he said, you will expand out into the cosmos and know all these things. We'll expand out into the cosmos. And I was given power that was immeasurably more powerful than I ever imagined God to be. And I was still cocky, I was still myself. I remember kind of puffing my chest up saying, I'm a super God. Not disrespect for God, but I'm a super God. We cannot comprehend what we're going to become. It's immeasurably more powerful than God is, that we think he is. As I'm kind of getting kind of cocky, God made his thought known to me and he gave me a vision. He's holding me in his hands like a premature infant. This is what you are. And I was telling Brian, it's like I'm born again into heaven this time, but he saw me and I felt his proudness like a parent feels a child when they're first born. And I'm thinking, well, this is confusion. He sees me as a little child. I felt his emotions. I felt he was proud of me. Here's this new infant coming into his world. But I'm still the super God. And then he smiled, and I felt him smile, and I felt his amusement. He said, even in this state that you were in, as a super God, you cannot begin to comprehend what I am. We can't comprehend what we're going to be, and he's still infinitely more powerful and loving and caring than that. So that kind of put me back in my place. And I'm thinking, I'll be able to go anywhere. And then all of a sudden, he kind of backed away, and I'm thinking, I don't have a body. This is frightening. It started to frighten me. And I actually went like this, and I could feel my fingers in my hands. And I said, well, I can't see me, but I'm here. And then he said, you're to go out and be everywhere. So I kind of stepped out of my body, and it was like all of a sudden I could be anywhere in his creation at one time, and I could focus on whatever I wanted to focus on. Then I went back in my body. And I went back and forth a couple times. And all of a sudden I started thinking, every time I went back in where I could feel like I'm in a body, it was horrible. It was so confining. I wanted to be out being free and out in the cosmos with God. As I'm experiencing all these things, the one that really surprised me was his love. And I'd say take a dictionary and take all the bad words out, regrets, sorrow, fear, embarrassment. They're not there. There is absolutely nothing in heaven that is bad. It's 100% pure love and happiness. All the things that I did in my past, you could remember them, but they were all forgiven. It's like, God, I made you that way for a reason which was not made known to me. And I'm feeling this love, and I tell people his love was so strong, I literally felt it. It's like being in the air when it's calm. You know the air is there, but you can't feel it. But then you soak in a warm bath, that warm water, you can feel that. God's love was so strong, I literally felt it. I felt his presence. And I knew I could be anywhere, and I'm loved, and I was forgiven. And I thought, this isn't a mean, vengeful God. Like I was even telling Brian, I remember the way I grew up, and they said the people cower, and they stand in the back of their church. I'm not worthy of being up front near God. Well, I had good, loving parents, and when I met my dad, we'd hug each other. I didn't cower up to my dad. Well, God doesn't want us to cower in front of him. He created us strictly to love. He has one need that I thought I felt. He needs to love. That's why he created all of us to love. He didn't create us so he could lord over us and dominate over us and make us feel inferior. He wants to love us. And I thought, that's not the God that I grew up knowing.
It wasn't an old man with a beard sitting in judgment of me at all. It was this very loving energy that had intelligence that we just can't even begin to understand, trapped in our brain, with the brain that we have. It was such intelligence that understood everything. And at the same time, no matter what I had done wrong, and there were things I had done wrong in my life, that energy, that intelligence just accepted me the way I am, just loved me the way I am, and let me know that the world, that the universe is so much bigger than we can comprehend. And if I would keep at it, if I would keep growing and learning that there's joy, and even more important than the joy, God let me know there's peace, because I had never had any peace.
This description I've read of it is, and this is what God is, it's an energy-like potentiality without size, without form, infinitely powerful, alive the same way your mind is alive because your mind is part of it, highly emotional, and therefore probably self-aware. That's it. And that mind brings forth everything. This reality, the after-death realities, all of reality. It's all in that mind. More and more scientists are stumbling toward these truths, but it's difficult for them because they're so afraid of finding God and having religionists win. The problem is religionists can't win because their view of God is totally wrong. They see God as built in human image. God is not human. God has no human failings. God is only love. Infinite love beyond our ability to comprehend it. I call it affinity. It's affinity for itself, and we're part of itself. So they're not going to really, neither science nor religion wins. There's a truth that can be informed by both sides, and that truth is all there is.
All that we had in that realm was the love that we had experienced. When he looked at me and he said, "Do you want to continue on?" I knew this meant go to the light of God. So I just flew. My soul just went towards, and God looked like this bright light. But it was more than a light. It was intelligence. It was a magnet. It was something that changed me. I can't describe how shocking it was. I'd never experienced love like that before, only pieces, through my grandfather, through parents, through friends. But this was I call it an atomic bomb of love because it was so massive. It just hit me. And I thought, wow, in physical form, we spend so much of our time not loving ourselves, not being happy with this circumstance, feeling anxious, we just spend so much of our time not really understanding that we're connected to the greatest love that we can imagine, and that we can all feel okay. We can all feel this bliss, that this is kind of our divine right and what we deserve, no matter how we've been treated in childhood, no matter what we've experienced. Every single one of us can connect to this love. I felt people's prayers trying to pull me back, and I just remember breaking through them, going, whatever, I'm going towards God. God's awesome. And as I got closer and closer to God, I didn't want to come back here. This place didn't seem interesting after experiencing God. I thought, I very much want to keep merging with God, going into that light and going into that beauty.
And there was this light frequency that showed up. I'm, if you will, in outer space, galaxies, looking down at Mother Earth, and before me is this massive ball of energy, current, fragment energy, gold energy. And I'm having a conversation with this energy. But even though this energy was in front of me, the conversation was coming from my back and going through my solar plexus and having a conversation. And it dawned on me at the close of this conversation that this was God. And born and raised Catholic, and then going from Catholic to becoming agnostic, and having this conversation with this being of compassion and kindness and love. How do you measure that? Imagine this. you know, a cat or a dog that you've rescued and you love and you just love it, or your child or your wife or your boyfriend or new love, and multiply that 10 times 10 times 10, 1 million. That's how much love you're feeling at this time.
I moved into what appeared to be a sea of light. It was as if every atom or molecule in this room had been electrified with love, with creative and very powerful love. We think of love as being something not powerful, but this love, I realized, was the greatest force of all things. And it was as if every atom were an individual and were singing and was welcoming me and was full of love. And yet I was more and more attracted to what I perceived to be the center of this sea of light. It was as if in the center of this sea there was a sun. And my heart was just irresistibly attracted to that. And again, in an instant, with a tremendous clash, not clash, but in a tremendous and magnificent instant, I entered this center of the sea of light, this sun in the sea, the light, the heart of the light. And it was as if I were devastated. It was as if I were, you know, just spider silk in the solar wind. I was completely devastated by bliss and by rapture and by ecstasy. And yet I was not. I was simply in and of, and because of that light, and yet I was, as an individual, destroyed. It was as if I were the quintessential phoenix. And it seemed that I was in that non-place, that place of non-being as an individual for forever. And then yet again, my consciousness at some point was gathered back together as an individual, like sands upon a shore, into an individual form.
Well, the first thing was when I was in front of the light, I thought maybe there is a God, and I'm in a lot of trouble. Because even though I didn't believe in a God, when I was sick, I cursed God and everything else. And I must have said what all good atheists say when they meet the light: "Are you God?" And the light said, "The light knows you, the source, the oversoul, the source of all, knows you intimately and very personally. So when the source speaks to you, it speaks to you so you understand it completely. There is no confusion. If there is confusion, you're not there." And so when I asked the light, "Are you God?" the light said to me, "Who and what is not God?" And in that moment, I understood something. If I had to tell you who and what God is, I would have to name every single thing in the entire universe, and that would take forever. So the best answer is, what is not God? It's all God. And that liberated me. The next question I asked was, well, why would you create humanity? Why would humanity be created when there are such dark and evil beings? And at that moment, the light turned into a mandala, or like a big round stained glass window that was alive, and I was breathed into the center of it. And in that center, it was like I could look into every human soul, including my own, and I could see no evil at all, no darkness in any human that's ever lived. And that may shock you, it shocked me, but I was there in the nexus, the mandala of human souls. And there is something in us all, and in all of nature and all of Gaia, that's incorruptible. No matter what you've ever done, it's incorruptible. And that is that source in you that is perfect, that is there already. And in that moment, I heard the light say, "Oh, beautiful human." It was a blessing. And in that moment, I fell in love with humanity again.
And the next thing I knew, I was in this vastness, this described in some literature as the outer darkness, but it was completely illuminated, but there was no light. And I had no body, but I had being, and there was no time and no space and no thing. I had no brain, I had no language, no culture, no heartbeat, but I could think better than I'd ever thought before, as if my brain was no longer in the way of my thinking. And I was in this vast emptiness that extended into infinity in every direction, and I could see in every direction all at once. And like I said, it was darkness, but it was illuminated because I could see in every direction. And in front of me was, if I had a front, was a shimmering door. And it was transparent and translucent. And inside this doorway was a tunnel. And it was immense. It was 100 yards wide and 70 yards tall. Just immense. But remember, everything I say happens in timelessness, so there's no order of events for me, and there's no language to communicate it. But I touched this thing with my being, and I felt it was living. It was like the living God was in it. And as I did that, I heard my name called from deep inside of me. And I knew instantaneously that I was in the presence of God, but not God like I'd ever conceived of before. And it was a voice, but it had no gender, and it had no sound, and it had no language, but it communicated to me directly in the depth of my being. And when my name was called, I knew that God was absolutely present to me, next to me, but I could see everything but not God. And the voice called my name, and it was the name of my creation. It was the name given to me to make me exist. It wasn't just Peter, it was the ground of my being, as Paul Tillich said. The ground and the essence of my being. And I was infilled with beauty and love and hope and truth and life and joy, but it was all one thing. But also simultaneously to that infilling and knowing that I was in the presence of God, all of my experiences rushed up too. And all of the pain that I'd caused everyone in my entire life came with it. And God said to me, I know everything about you, and there is nothing hidden. And in that knowing that I was known, I experienced a life review of all the people that I had hurt in my life. I experienced all of the pain that I'd ever given to every single person of my entire life. I didn't look at their pain, I lived their pain. And it was the pain that I gave them intentionally, and the pain that I didn't even know that I had given them. Meanwhile, as I was going through this experience of self-judgment, the voice was saying to me, I know you. I've always known you. You are my creature. I made you. I make you. I love you as you are. I have always loved you. I loved you into being. I love you with all the pain you caused, and I love you without it. I love all of you. And none of this is a surprise to me. I know this about you already. And because I felt shame at my actions, in comparison with the infinity of love, I judged myself guilty, and I was forgiven. Jesus talks about the kernel and the chaff gets burned off in the fire, sort of like that. And then all of the pain was gone. And I was left with only love and beauty and joy and truth and hope and compassion, all one thing. And I got to bring with me into heaven all of the love that I'd ever given away and all of the love that was ever given to me. And that was the treasure of myself. And I said to the voice, am I dead? And the voice said, yes, you're dead. And I said, well, I can't die now. And the voice said, why? And I said, well, because of my sister and my parents. If I take another child from my parents, they will suffer. So God swept me and showed me all of earth. And in showing me all of earth, I saw that the length of my life was the wink of an eye. And timelessness, time has no meaning. And I saw every human being on earth individualized. And I saw them loved in the same way that I was loved in heaven. And God said to me, in the way that I love you now, you know that I've always loved you. And it was self-evident to me that God's love is the size of the cosmos, the billions and billions of years that the universe has existed. And the greatest love I'd ever experienced in my life was a speck of dust in comparison. The immensity and infinite love of God is unbelievably overwhelming. And that's the love I'd always been loved with. And I knew that to be true. And I knew that every single human being was loved in the same way. But the difference between the human beings and me was that they couldn't see. They were still in the world with a veil, not knowing the immensity of love. Couldn't know it, not built into the structure, but still loved nonetheless. And God showed me my parents in particular. And I could see their faces and I could see their suffering. And God said to me, all will be well with them, because all has always been well, and all will be well, and all is well, because I love them. And you know this to be true, and I knew it to be true, that in the end my parents would no longer suffer, because in death they would be immersed in the ocean of love. But I do know this, that God is love beyond imagination, and that every single human being is beloved of God, and that all flesh life here has a veil that cannot see that. You experience love inside yourself when you love somebody. You know what it's, for those of you who have lost people, a child, God forbid, or a spouse, you know what that pain is. And the pain is proportional to the amount of love that you shared. That's why we suffer grief. It's like we have a tentacle, and we extend this tentacle into this other being, our husband, our wife, and they extend one back into us, and we share this thing, and then they die, and it gets cut off here, and it gets cut off there, and now you've got a hole here, and this one's dangling with no attachment, and we suffer. But the love is still present, but you experience it as grief. Love is the operative. Every near-death person who goes far enough says the same thing. God is love. All of the great saints and all of the traditions say the same thing. God is love. Now maybe Jesus' death and resurrection, which by the way I have absolutely no problem with. Why can't he rise again? Why wouldn't that be possible? Maybe he opened the gate to heaven so that we can see that God is real. And maybe the salvation, like Karl Rahner, the Catholic theologian, said, the salvation is universal for all the planets of all the cosmos. I don't know. All I know is that love is real, and love is the thing that matters most. And that you get to carry it with you when you die. It's your treasure of your heart, which is what Jesus said.
The feeling that everything is important, everything is part of a greater whole, is something that the words just fall. They don't encapsulate how important that is, that it's all one, and we're all part of that one. That darkness that I was talking about was aware, but it was not a point of awareness, it was a field of awareness. It was the backdrop of reality. It was the essence. The darkness was just the color that was around me at the time. If you call it darkness a color. The darkness itself wasn't what was holding me. It wasn't what was cradling me. It wasn't what was loving me, and it wasn't the source of the information. It was that field of awareness. For lack of a better word, I'll call it God. Unfortunately, that comes with a lot of baggage because people have meaning behind that word. But that is the closest I can come to. It's a completely infinite in its vastness. And yes, I often refer to it as it. It doesn't mind. The information I had, the love, was just more than I could take in, like I said, but yet somehow it fit. But yet for some reason, I felt like there should be something more. Perhaps it was my Catholic upbringing, perhaps it was just expectations of what it was I was supposed to find, because I was realizing I am dead. And I was looking for an angel, I was looking for Jesus, I was looking for a form for that infinite love to take, and I didn't find anything. It was just a field, it was just open field, meaning like an electric field. It's not like a grassy field. But it didn't take any form there. It was just its raw essence. It was just in its pure state. And I'll get to the possible meanings later, but I kept feeling like there should be something more. Where is everything? I felt my connection to everything, but I didn't know where it was, and I wanted to see it with these new eyes that didn't exist. And yeah, it's a lot of paradox involved in explaining an NDE, isn't there? But I kept looking, I kept searching and feeling, and that point of awareness that I wasn't an intelligence, I wasn't a person, so to speak, I wasn't a mind, it was just a point of awareness with a history and a personality. And as that point of awareness reached out into the darkness, it was like an amoeba sending part of itself out. I wasn't actually seeing the darkness, I was experiencing it directly. Because there's no light, I can't see it, I can't experience it. But being a point of awareness, I would actually extend myself into that darkness. And so again, very hard to explain, but like an amoeba sending out parts of myself out to infinity, I just kept going. And I kept feeling that this darkness was infinite, and the field was infinite, but I never reached the end. And I'd research in all directions, because again, location was only where I was, but I was just at one point within a field. And I kept trying to turn, but how do you turn when you don't have a front? You don't have a top, you don't have a bottom, left and right, and very little. But I kept trying to shift, and I'm not sure what I did, but I liken it to having one's head stuck in a vise and using your eyes, darting back and forth, looking up and down, and not being able to turn your head. And then suddenly the vise is released and my head shifted, and brought into a new perspective was the light. And everything shifted. I'm not sure if it was passing through one of those multiple dimensions that space had there. I said it's surreal. It's really hard to explain. But there was a shift. And I don't know if it was I changed frequency or I tuned into another station, but suddenly there was something. There was a form. It was the light. And the light had structure to it. The perfect purity of my experience had ended at that point. I went into stage 2, which I still, to this day, wish I was in stage 1. I still was in a dark place, and I still felt that infinite love from all directions all around me. And I still felt at home. I still felt like I belonged. But something else was there, the light. And the light was, whereas the darkness was very feminine, the light was very masculine. And the darkness shared the love, but the light shared glory. And the light that I saw was really hard to explain. The structure of it was like, if you've seen a pane of glass lit from the end, the entire pane glows. If you take a point in space, and just call that the center, there's nothing there, but then you place panes of glass, infinite panes of glass around that point, where the panes would cross, they would cross through one another, and there'd be a little streak of light, like the edge of that pane of glass, that always glows a little bit brighter than the pane itself. But that streak would go out to infinity because these are infinite panes of glass, hypothetically. And they all crossed about the same point, same distance away from the central point. So it had a glow to it that reached out to infinity. And that glow was also streaked through with these crystalline-like lines, these little ribbons of light that reached out to infinity. And I'm not sure if there's any meaning to the structure that it had, but it was very crystalline in nature. And every pane was roughly the same distance from the center, and it felt so bright, like it almost familiar to me. To this day, I don't know if I was looking at an electron up close, or if I was looking at the entirety of creation. I don't know if each of those panes was a different parallel universe. I don't know what the scale was. I didn't even have a body still. So it didn't mean anything to me how large this was. Within each of those panes, to make it even more complicated, within each pane was little fireflies. Whereas the panes were glowing this milky, soothing white color, the little fireflies were rainbow. They were multiple different colors. They were all moving and swirling. The crystalline structure as a whole, those panes weren't moving relative to one another or toward the center, but the little fireflies were dancing within those panes. And where the two panes would cross, where you'd have that little ribbon of light, the ones that were crossing on one side were mirrored on the other side. And I just saw like wheels within wheels. There was a depth to the structure, to the pattern, to the plan of the whole dance. And it was happening on an infinite scale. And I'm not sure what that center was, and I don't know what the panes were, and I don't even know what the fireflies were, but it all seemed to be familiar to me at that point. And whereas when I was in the darkness, I had all knowledge. I'd just think about something, and I knew exactly not only what I wanted to know, but how it fit in with everything else. I couldn't behold all of creation at the same time. I think only God could do that. But I felt how each part would fit in with the whole. And I knew so much. But when I was looking at that light, the only thought that I could hold in my mind, if you will, was wow. It was just awe. And it was like time had again stopped. And I don't know how long I was looking at that light, but it was like I lost myself in that light. And but I just came to in that darkness, and I was surrounded by this unconditional love. And I was aware that the darkness, not really the darkness, but I'll get to that later, was aware of me as well. I wasn't alone. The darkness felt like it was cradling me, like a mother would hold her child. And the mother doesn't look at her child, the perfect mother doesn't look at her child and see flaws. She just radiates it with love, and that's what I felt there. It was a very maternal aspect of God, if you will. That's the feminine aspect, the first part of my experience. And it's very dualistic. My awareness was also not only on the other awareness that was there, but the fact that I knew things I shouldn't know, or that I didn't know I already knew. I realized there was an awareness there, so I thought to ask it a question, to speak to it. And as that the question came into my mind, I already knew the answer. And there wasn't even a need for telepathy, because I already knew everything that I ever wanted to know. It was just a matter of focusing on it. And as I wanted to know something, not only what I wanted to know came through, but the fully abridged version of it with references to how that one little piece of the answer was fitted into the rest of creation. Every part of reality fit perfectly together. I felt connected to everything, even though I was completely in an empty space. I had no point of reference to where everything that I knew was, but I knew that every part of creation was part of me as well. And that connection was deeper than, I've likened it to a machine where each of us are cogs within a machine, and how the machine would never run perfectly without all of its cogs in place. And that sometimes comes off as kind of demeaning. Okay, we're just cogs in a machine. But no, it's each part is integral to the entire whole. Each part is the whole.